Hi, this is Wayne Shipman. I had a really great conversation with Timothy West, he goes by TJ, on his podcast show called My Blurred Opinion. The name of this talk was Confronting Your Pain, and it was recorded actually on Father's Day 2021. The original talk lasted more than an hour. We got really excited, it was unscripted, and we just kept going. So the original recording has been split into 3 segments for easier listening. But as the conversation goes, we opened up some of the most penetrating topics you can imagine. We both made every effort to remain non-biased, non-judgmental, and non-offending during this talk. But we opened up some really serious things, like on the mental health subjects of bipolar depression, serious anger management problems, drug addiction and recovery, homelessness and life on the streets. I lived outdoors for almost 3 years in Portland, Oregon. And I was outside as a homeless person on Father's Day missing my children. So we talk about some of that stuff. And even at one time, I had very serious contemplation of suicide. So as the conversation goes on, we brought all of that mess to an end by my journey of recovery from then until now. So here's TJ opening the conversation.
Honestly, this episode came out of nowhere. It actually is Father's Day. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I thank you all for your support and love, and I appreciate it, really. It's Father's Day, and it's a holiday that a lot of people can't appreciate or accept or even want to celebrate because of bad memories. And me and Wayne and I go into some really deep topics, and we talk about some really hard feelings and emotions and pain, and we unravel things, but it all is connected, and I hope you guys take something from it. And like I said, I'm very grateful for everyone who supported this podcast. I'm trying to take this somewhere. I care so much. Very special episode, as I always say, but we found each other, I believe, on Facebook, being a father, and Father's Day, which is actually, as we're recording this, is today.
I'm Wayne Shipman, but today is Father's Day, and at least for me, it's not a bad thing anymore. Through the years, this was the holiday of the year that was the most difficult to deal with. Before I was homeless, while I was homeless, and after I got back on my feet. Through the years, I'm 53 years old now. I've got 3 adult children, and they're all close to 30 years old, and we have 6 grandchildren altogether in the families across America, product of divorce. And but I got 6 grandbabies now, and it's kind of scary, They're coming into the world just around the COVID area. This has changed things, For the homeless people, man, COVID has really had its effects on the homeless communities far and wide, and most of us can't possibly imagine, really what they're going through. Just being homeless right now during COVID has been a major impact in our society, where previous to COVID, when I was homeless a few years ago, to be honest, I was in Portland, Oregon when I was living outdoors as a homeless person. I've kind of traveled the country, and I went kind of freelance partying for a while and riding the Greyhound buses, and, I'd show up in a town and work one of the temp labor gigs or something and stay in the mission shelters. And honestly, I didn't really know that was being homeless. I just thought that was like kind of just kicking it, having fun. But I was real deal homeless in Portland, Oregon, even to the extent that I lived out in a tent out in a little patch of woods just outside of town there. That was probably the darkest, most difficult period of my life, because I was in this big metropolitan city noticing other homeless people. My situation turned worse and worse as I was trying to deal with major depression. I had some really serious anger problems. Later on, a few years later, I started going to therapy and counseling, and I had actual psychologists or psychiatrists and doctors giving me those psychological evaluations. And we were able to kind of pinpoint some of my most obvious issues. I didn't know at the time that I was dealing with some bipolar. I had bipolar depression. kind of from a late teenage years through my early 20s. It was a mild kind of bipolar depression, but it kept reoccurring. And then when I actually ended up divorced and kind of living separate from my children, I started feeling some elements of shame. Like every year, Father's Day would come around, and I would go out of my way, and I think I was trying a little too hard, pushing myself, but I would start calling them and texting them, like a week before Father's Day and stuff. And it was hard on all of us because, one of my messages that I'm hoping to communicate to the homeless community is, society tends to try and make things picturesque. We're supposed to be a certain way. We're supposed to think a certain way and act a certain way. Our kids are supposed to be a certain way, and we want them to join the soccer team, and we want them to bring home their report cards, and we want them to go to college. But, man, 65% divorce rate in this country, what it means, 65 out of every 100 families are living separated from each other. Generally, the children are growing up with a man that's not actually their dad, but he has to be the dad. And the father who's out there, regardless if he's doing well or not, he's automatically labeled with some sort of shame, some sort of disgrace by society, saying, well, it must be your fault. It wasn't really my fault that I wasn't there for my children, because this was all between me and my wife. It had nothing to do with parenting. And as a homeless person sitting out in the benches of Portland, Oregon, year after year for Father's Day, I was out there 3 years in a row on Father's Day. Now, I'm the kid that grew up in the house. I witnessed 5 marriages by the time I was 12 years old. Before I was in high school, men were coming into my house kind of like a dime a dozen, who's my stepdad this year, kind of thing. And I was so jealous of my friends because they had really cool dads. They were building plastic models with their dads. They were skateboarding. Dad was trying. He was falling, but he was out there. Mine wasn't. And so later on, what I've realized, I also witnessed 5 divorces. They never worked out. None of them did. And the hidden, deep, dark secret that took me decades to deal with is I was living a pretend life because I went through an adoption process as a teenager, but I was given false information deliberately so that I would go through with it. The whereabouts of my biological father was kept from me. He kept trying to get in touch with me, but I was never told about it. And later on, it went further than it should have went, which left me so emotionally wounded that it took me literally like 30 years of my life to come to terms with it. But me and my father were tricked into signing the papers of this adoption so that, my mother would have this fantasy family and her husband at the time would be my dad and all this stuff. Well, I had a sister. My sister and I both witnessed all of this. And it took many years for the truth to come out. But when I finally realized what happened, we were tricked and lied to. I found out I had a brother who was 24 years old at the time, and I didn't even know I had a brother. Okay. And I had like 3 other half sisters on that side of the family. So I've got a brother and 4 sisters that I grew up without. Fathers are expected to be a certain way as a father. And it's sort of generic, and each person, each family has their own situations. Everybody's situation is unique, but every personality, every person has their own personality. And when you're blending personalities and you're all trying to live together and everything, it gets really difficult because Father's Day and Mother's Day in particular, by society standards, is supposed to like portray the happy family. When it's Mother's Day, then everybody brings Mom flowers and we take her out to dinner and tell her, thank you for being my mom. And, the truth is some children have a hard time saying that. And on Father's Day, it's the same thing. Some children have a really hard time.
Even if they love them.
Yeah, even if they love them to death, man. It's just usually, like in my case, obviously I don't want to, get too much into private matters, but my children were pretty young, 6, 7, 8 years old, and they were witnessing me and my former spouse kind of arguing a lot and not real happy. We weren't happy being together. And I had a lot of depression issues at the time, and I had anger issues, but it wasn't amplified. It wasn't an actual disorder. I don't think it was an actual disorder at that time. It became a disorder over the years by not being able to cope with my feelings and things. So when I was separated from my family there, as a person being homeless, just being out in public, just seeing all the other families, like today is Father's Day. So anywhere you go, you see fathers and the kids are kind of dancing around their dads, and they're all excited, and they're going to get ice cream, or they're going to get dinner, or whatever they're doing. The reality is, as you know, there's a 65% divorce rate in our country.
Yep.
It's been that way for a long time, I think.
Before you go into that, I wanted to add something. You were talking about just arguing in front of your kids, and just bringing that back to my story quickly. Like, my mom and dad, they got a divorce, I don't know, when I was like 5. They're just arguing, and my dad's coming home late, and my mom has just had it, and they're both just arguing constantly in front of me, and I'm like picking sides and all that, and stuff like that doesn't really get talked about a whole lot, because it's just like, you don't really know as a parent. I don't have any kids, so I don't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to be the kid.
Yes.
And it can be very destructive, because you grow up in this household, and you're brought into this world by these two people that you care about more than anything. And then it breaks up, and then you get old enough. Like in my case, I get old enough, and now I'm like, okay, obviously I completely favor my mother, but there's still always this like love and care for my father. And then I see now he's older and he's sickly, and and I'm trying to make amends the best way I can, even though it's not really mostly my fault here, but I'm trying to fix it. And it's like, that's why I think this topic is so good, because it's one of those where it's just like, it brings stuff up for me too, because I'm just like, you and I are kind of on the opposite spectrum of it. I'm the kid in this situation, and you're the father. But yeah, as you were saying,
hey man, it's a universal. Hearing you say that, I came from an extremely violent, busted up kind of family background, and when it was my turn to be out here, to be honest with you, I had to start when I was 18 years old, leaving the house, and really figure out what the world is about. And I was living on kind of fantasized idealism about patriotism. And I joined the Army, which is something I swore I would never do. My mother was in the military, and my stepdad wasn't at the time when I was really young. Before I dive there, there's a couple things that I hope you can help me kind of nail down in this, because it's so universal.
All
Number
right.
one is, I've heard in more than one of your podcasts, you talk about there's an obvious difference between a visible disability and an invisible disability.
Okay.
Someone in a wheelchair, or someone using crutches, or someone, with a prosthetic limb, that's something we can see, and we know, they have a challenge. But most of us are walking around, and there's very disturbing things that we're carrying around with us. It's a taboo. We have to keep it unspoken. Like you said, it's something that really doesn't get talked about and doesn't get dealt with.
Yeah.
And so then what I've realized in my experience, because since I was homeless, my last night out under the stars as a homeless person was 2007. Okay.
Okay.
And from that time until this day, 2021, I've been on a sort of journey of recovery that I decided to take the challenge. I challenged myself to go on this journey, and it's turned into something where I've had to go back in time and literally open up those wounds and memories and deal with them,
Right.
mostly privately. Some of the people that were involved back then, it's so ancient and outdated now. It's not fair to them to call them up on the phone and just like yell at them and say, man, you really hurt me back there, and I just wanted to tell you about it. That's not really what I've been doing. So there's invisible disabilities issue. And a lot of times, TJ, when we get on this topic, it's kind of assumed that what we're talking about is like severe mental disabilities or severe disorders, personality disorders and medicated treatments and all that stuff. With a 65% divorce rate, I keep coming back to that because I discovered this truth as a homeless person. Sitting around with other homeless people, a lot of times we end up talking to each other, just talking. And it's like, well, what happened to you, man? Why are you out here? And pretty soon we start talking about the real deal issues that we tell each other as a homeless person that we've never really dealt with until we're sitting on a bench somewhere and we don't know what else to do.
Right.
And that's sort of a bad thing, but that's what they say. You have to hit rock bottom, right?
Yeah. And I think most people would consider homeless being rock bottom.
That rock bottom, yeah. But, some people experience homeless, and it's a temporary transition. It's just real quick, they're out there, and they're sleeping in their car or something, and then their car gets towed away or, whatever, and they're homeless. Well, then if they don't have these issues that I'm talking about carrying around serious unresolved issues that turn into like guilt and shame and a really serious depression that even medications don't seem to fix. It kind of numbs the pain. And like with me, with my anger issues, the medication treatments that they were experimenting with for a while, they were helping to kind of manage my brain chemistry. When you have a bipolar kind of issue, it's not just a trigger into depression. My brain actually filters things in a way that puts me into depression, and then I have to work myself out of it deliberately. And that's what bipolar anger does. I get triggered, not necessarily now, but before I knew what it was, before I had any skills of dealing with it, managing it, sensing it when it was coming, when I was going to be triggered. I knew I had to figure this stuff out. Well, before that, my children would see me walk in, kind of come down, sit down at the table and hang out. And, my wife would walk by and she would just kind of look at me sarcastic or whatever. The kids didn't even notice what was going on, but there's a history there with me and my spouse. So she would trigger me. And I would just come off the wall, just blah, 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 blah. And then I would slam the door and walk outside. And I would stand outside and go, what in the world was that all about there, Wayne? And it was a surprise to me as much as it was anyone else. And so that was kind of my invisible disability that I'm kind of referring to. And that thing can spiral and spiral and spiral. And part of what I think is kind of our downfall as the proud patriotic society that we are, there's so many things that we shush each other and we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to bring it up. We don't want to deal with it. Well, eventually the person carrying those things are the ones that are wounded and nowhere to go with it, no way to process it. And so my homeless experience started out as, hey, you know what? I'm having such a hard time. I would get a job, lose a job, get a job, lose a job. And I just took to the streets because in Portland at the time, infinite resources, there was mission shelters on every other city corner, day shelters, night shelters, places to go hang out, and just activities for the homeless. They would line up on the sidewalk, several hundred people, and they would have like cookouts and just serve the homeless. And I was like, I'm just going to go hang with these people for a while. Well, I got stuck out there, to be honest. I got stuck. I went out for the summer, just kind of hung out and partied with everybody, and I was big into smoking pot back then. That was my go-to thing, Man, I get depressed or angry or whatever, and just poof, that was my go-to thing. I started back in 2005, is when I really became homeless, living outdoors. And people started saying, hey, man, what are you going to do this winter? And I'm like, winter? It's 4th of July. I ain't care about the winter. And they're like, dude, winter's coming. Like, you need to get ready for winter because if you're going to be homeless in the winter, it's very different. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'll just go get a job, Well, I started that trying to go get a job, and it's real tough. One thing we don't give the homeless credit for is just being willing to get up in the morning, wherever they sleep,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's, in a dorm or in a shelter or behind the bushes. They're willing to get up every day, comb their hair, come back out, and be seen.
Yeah.
Knowing that everyone's looking at them and they know that they're homeless, they're still willing to come out and keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. And that's where I started really wanting to advocate for them. So while I was homeless, I sort of made myself a proclaimed advocate, And so I started trying to go to some of the public meetings and things. It's really easy for the public. Anybody in public can go to certain events that are set up, like city hall meetings. There's meetings going on all the time that people don't attend. So then when City Hall gets together and they say, we got enough budget to do this, this, or this. We got 3 choices, and we need to know where to put these funds. And 4 people show up. I saw from the inside how when people don't really get involved and they don't participate in some way, I don't mean that they all have to go out, giving, sack lunches and all of that stuff, but people that do not get involved. It's kind of like, I do not want to get political here, but people that do not cast a vote, then they're all upset about who's in the office.
Right.
People that don't understand the politics, and I'm not saying that I do, but as an observer, if you didn't vote for someone, then what voice do you have? Do you have a right just because you're an American or just because you're in a free country? Well, here we are on Father's Day, and I'm on the fence between how, what really is my assignment to do with, I want to have a website. I want to do podcasting. I want to do something. I want to go to the homeless missions. I want to serve food. I want to do something for the homeless because I'm not homeless anymore. And I think the homeless people really respect and respond to people that were formerly homeless that reach back.
Right.
And so kind of by being here and talking to you today is kind of my start on doing that. And I hope your audience, I really believe by hearing some of your interviews already, you're going to be one of the big time YouTubers. It's not going to take you very long to get a really amazing audience. And it's important to lay out certain things. And one of those things that I don't want to be missed by people that hear us, the invisible disabilities that we live with or the invisible wounds that we carry around are very real.
Right. We don't even know they're there half the time.
Oh yeah, you can't. I've got a scar on the left side of my face. It's huge. When I was younger, I ran into a piece of playground equipment. I was running a football, dude, and I was looking backwards. This guy was almost catching me. I think back then we called it smear the queer.
Of course.
There really wasn't any rules. You get the ball, you run. You try to get a point. I was looking backwards, and they were all pointing. And I was just like, yeah, whatever. And I turned around and looked, and I ran smack into one of the swing sets, like cut my face open. I got this obvious scar here. Well, I have a lot of scars that I carry around, and unless we start talking about it, you don't know they're there.
Yeah.
And I've at least come to the point of acceptance and healing, and it's Father's Day. And up until only probably 3 or 4 years ago, Father's Day would send me into a loop of depression that started one day after Mother's Day. I kind of wish we would have Mother's Day and the following weekend was Father's Day. We could crunch it up, get it together, get it done.
Yeah.
Knock it out. But dude, it's like 6 weeks.
Well, it's funny that you just said that because I remember, I don't know, maybe we'll just say 10 years ago, I was in therapy and my therapist was just kind of prodding and trying to get some stuff out of me, which I'm very open. But she's like, well, you don't ever really talk about your father much. And I'm like, well, I don't know how much is there. And then we went on, like, we did a whole hour on it. And I realized like how much anger and resentment and how much was there that I hadn't addressed to him, outwardly, to myself, to my mother, to anybody. And I realized I was going on these like anger-filled rants, and I was just like, holy shit, like I really am carrying something that I just didn't want to address, which is why I'm trying to be friends with my father now. Part of the reason. And so, yeah, I mean, it's and Father's Day comes around, and it's like I plan on calling him later and just seeing how he's doing. But it's just one of those things where it's just like like you said, you don't know how much you carry until one day it just kind of seeps out, and you're sitting there left with yourself going, "What the hell was that?" And,
yeah.
And it's been there the whole time.
Exactly.
You just kept going by it. Yeah.
I'll tell you something, just so that people that are listening to this can get a sense of perspective. And I'm usually pretty self-reserved about telling too much, you know.
Right.
And my intention here is not targeted to anyone that I know in particular, but I want to let you guys know this is much more common than we realize. There's more people carrying around that kind of, it's not anger, TJ, it's pain, unresolved things that convert to pain. It's an emotional pain. And when we feel that pain, it kind of reveals in anger because it's like, oh my God. And, you know, you're not sure what you're mad about. You're not sure what to be pissed off about, but it's there.
Right.
So just to give you a rundown, I'm going to do this really quick. Okay. And this will be a testimony for how far I've come because I chose, and I want homeless people to hear this, especially on any holiday. I chose to take this journey. And what it meant was I had to go inside with myself, kind of like Rocky Balboa in the ring. I was getting beat up, knocked down, knocked out, bloody, and I kept getting up. I kept getting up. I kept getting up. And even at the end, when Apollo Creed thought he knocked him down for real, he turned his back, raised his arms. Everybody started going nuts because Rocky stood up one more time. He barely moved his gloves. Remember that? His gloves were down by his waist, and he was going, come on, come over here. And Apollo Creed looked down, and he shook his head, and he was like, this guy is crazy. I'm going to have to, like, actually hurt this fool, you know.
Right.
I'm that guy, but the fight was with myself, okay?
The best analogy was actually the last Rocky, where he's older, and he's talking to his son because his son is embarrassed of kind of living in his father's shadow. And he's kind of letting life beat him down, and he's talking to him and saying, like, you know, you're part of me, and you know, you're not a quitter, and you're quitting on everything, and life is going to beat you harder than anyone will ever do, and it's your choice to either get up or let life beat you to the ground. And that's what you have. I mean, yeah, you choose to lay down and let life consume you, or you get up and you fight to either get knocked down again, but you get back up and you just keep pushing, or you just give up.
This is the end of part 1. I really hope you're glad you tuned in and listened to us having this talk today. And I'm pretty sure that if you keep listening to the next part of this conversation, you'll be pleasantly surprised. You know, I gotta be honest here. Through the years, I wasn't able to have a conversation like this in this way. It was more like talking through my teeth with an edge of anger, frustration, anxiety, worry, and a great deal of depression. You know, I wasn't really angry at anyone in particular. I think I just found myself in a hopeless situation, looking back through the years, realizing the mistakes I made, especially as a father, knowing that it couldn't be fixed. So we always just try to do the best we can, look forward to the future, and make every effort to have a better future by mending the past. So as it turns out, the following parts of this conversation is going to reveal how I managed to turn all of that mess into a beautiful future. So I hope you'll continue listening. There's a little bit of something for everyone in these conversations. It's not just limited to Father's Day. These things are universal for most of the holidays through the year. So we're going to be dealing with that and so much more in the next part of this conversation.